Hi, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Ask Spurrell CPA. Today we're talking about, the clickbait was don't keep employees forever. Don't keep them forever. That was a little bit of a clickbait headline, but I have May here to break this down with me. So May, have you seen employers have some issues with their employees so far, and we're reviewing the paperwork and ROEs and hours, and it's a never-ending issue for sure for entrepreneurs and business owners. So the quote that we have here is a Jim Collins quote, author of 6 business books, and he says, "Letting the wrong people hang around is unfair to the right people, as they inevitably find themselves compensating for the inadequacies of the wrong people. Worse, it can drive away the best people. Strong performers are intrinsically motivated by performance, and when they see their efforts impeded by carrying around extra weight, they eventually become frustrated." And the statistic that I have here is the average millennial employee is only staying with their employer for 2.3 years. But then the story that we have is business owners, they lose an employee or two, and they start to doubt themselves, their processes, or their vision for the business, simply because they lost an employee or two. So maybe what do you think of the questions that these business owners should be asking?
They should be asking, what makes losing employees expensive?
So what makes it expensive are, A, you have to recruit a new employee, B, then you have to train the employee, and that has a specific cost to it as well. That transition from one employee to the next, sometimes that can cost you some revenue and some customers. So those sort of expenses, they begin to add up. There could be a certain cost to transitioning and replacing employees. And this, obviously, it's better to keep employees than it is to lose employees, because it is, sometimes can be cheaper to keep the ones you have.
And why is it keeping the wrong employees even more expensive than losing one?
Yeah, this is where I say sometimes. So we all know that there's costs for bringing another employee on and training them. But think about the bigger cost is if you have the wrong person working in that role and they continue to deliver subpar performance day after day, month after month, year after year, what is that cost? So we always talk about the cost of bringing on a new employee, but what's the cost of having the wrong employee on? It can be, I would think it can be multiplied time over time again for the cost of bringing on a new employee.
Is it realistic to keep an employee for life?
No, it's not realistic. Think about this. I tried to explain it to a business owner. They're really down about not keeping an employee, and they think they need to change and blow up their business system because one person left. And I said, 50% of all marriages end in divorce, but they're really upset that they lost one employee. That's just how it works. I mean, the average person is staying 2.3 years. As employers, we need to do the things that we can to increase that retention rate. But at the same time, we can't do things that are going to encourage the wrong people to stay around too. There's going to be a certain amount of transition that's necessary.
Why should you have 2 people familiar with any role in your business?
See, you're always going to have things, people are going to come in and out of the business. And having 2 people familiar with that role is extremely important. And we get into that, kind of fallacy, thinking that this person will never leave. Well, that usually is the person who does leave. And a lot of times, people think, well, why would they leave? I mean, they could get sick. They could get hit by a bus. Their spouse gets transferred to a completely different city that you're in. There's a number of things that can happen that even if the relationship is absolutely perfect, it just is no longer, a good fit anymore. So you want to have 2 people familiar with any role. So you always have that, okay, if this person is no longer there, this person can fill that role.
And why should you always be recruiting?
As soon as you have staff, staff do not leave when it's good for the business generally. Staff normally leave when it's good for them. And that can be a really sobering fact for a lot of entrepreneurs, and they normally have to see it and get burnt by it once or twice. But they're going to leave. If they get sick when they get sick. If they get pregnant when they get pregnant, not based on the growth of the business. If their spouse gets transferred, that has nothing to do with you or your business. Sometimes they just decide that this is not the right career path for them. We had people. We had one recently. He wanted to be an accountant and now he's running a retail store. And guess what? He loves us. He hired us as his accountant. But he just felt accounting wasn't for him, and that's going to happen for every business owner. So you always need to be recruiting, because as soon as you need people, you always need people, and you never know when you need the next one.
And how can you use the corporate values in the interview process?
Yeah, so you can use the corporate values because you go through the interview process, and a lot of times you look up these questions. You can Google standard interview questions, or you can give me an example of you being a team player, give me an example of you dealing with a difficult situation. But what's important to the company? How do you communicate that to the average employee? What's important to you versus the things that are maybe not so important to you. If you have that good list of corporate values, you can just go straight through it, and then the employee gets a real clear picture of who you are and if they want to work here.
And why should corporate values be polarizing?
Yeah, so some people, they write corporate values as if they're a politician and they're trying to please everybody. Don't write your corporate values that way, because your corporate values should deter some people from working there. Some people should read the corporate values and say, this isn't the right place for me. That's a success. If your corporate values aren't polarizing, that just as many people say, I don't want to work here, as that say, I do want to work here, you're just getting the wrong people on the bus. So you want to make those polarizing values, knowing full well that some people will read them and say, this is not for me, because that's going to help you get the right people in. It's just a really succinct way to communicate who you are, who you're not, and let the employee know, is this a good fit for them or not.
Are salary and wages the most important factor in keeping employees?
They are not the most important factor. There's a reason why people can, not-for-profits can survive, and if they were the most important factor, I would say, well, why isn't everybody working in some work camp in Fort McMurray? They're not the most important factor. They are an important factor, but they're certainly not the most important. The location and the work-life balance and the simply the mission of what the company is trying to accomplish is probably the one of the most single important factors. There's a reason why people do a lot of volunteer work. They're not getting paid anything, zero, but they believe in what they're doing. And that's the reason why people volunteer. And employers often forget that they think it's just the wage.
And are annual reviews useful in keeping employees?
I don't think they're useful. As I've progressed through my business career, you go to that annual review. I would think that it's a more periodic review. The average business owner, you only have so much time to do reviews, so you probably want to carve some time out each and every week, and you can pull a couple of employees in, people who are really knocking it out of the park, and people who are struggling, and get a couple people in and congratulate the ones who are doing well, and you're congratulating them a short time after they've done something well, as opposed to a year later where maybe they did something well 9 months ago, but it comes time to the review and they're kind of falling behind. Now what are you congratulating for? They don't even remember, or you might not even remember. It's the same thing if they're struggling. If they're struggling on something, why are we waiting until the end of the year to bring that up? Let's bring that up so they can have a shot of fixing it and moving that forward. When it comes to just doing annual reviews, it starts to become more you're doing annual reviews because you have to get them done. When you're doing periodic reviews, you're doing them because you're trying to congratulate people for good performance as close to that good performance actually occurred, or you're trying to correct problematic performance as close to when that problematic performance became evident. So it becomes less about getting the review done and more outcome oriented. We're trying to encourage that positive behavior to keep occurring, and we're trying to prevent that negative behavior from ever occurring again and reinforce it as quickly as possible.
And how often should you schedule time to do reviews?
I think you should schedule time for reviews every single week. And if you schedule time every single week, I think it really allows you, especially on that corrective action. People have that corrective action. If you have it scheduled every single week, this no longer becomes another event. Just because something bad happens on Wednesday, you don't have to shut down business and reevaluate all your plans. It's like on Monday, I've got this time set out in the schedule to do a little bit of a one-on-one review with this employee. We can bring him in then, and we can correct that activity. And it's the same thing. Someone really helped out on a project that week, and bring them, and you can congratulate them as close to that project, because then that positive behavior is more likely to occur again next week if it was reinforced. The quicker you can reinforce that positive behavior, the more likely it's to reoccur, and the quicker you can correct that negative behavior, the less likely it is to recur. And if you wait to the end of the year, I think it's a real uphill battle to correct and reinforce at that point in time. So I think that's what we have here today. Thanks again for tuning in for another episode. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the section below, and we'll do our best to address them in future videos. And please hit the like and subscribe buttons so we can continue to deliver you tips on how to beat the odds of business. Thanks very much.